In this video, we'll explore the concept of the sun as a universal deity, following the account found in the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall. The reverence for the sun stands as one of the oldest and most instinctive expressions of spiritual devotion. Many elaborate theological systems can be traced back to this foundational belief, which arose from the early human recognition of the sun's life-giving power. To ancient minds, the sun was not merely a source of warmth and light, but a direct representative of the highest divine force. Albert Pike, in Morals and Dogma, described this early view clearly, noting that the sun was regarded as the vital fire within all things, the source of life and the mover behind all existence. It was perceived as eternal, boundless, and essential, its presence a comfort, its absence a cause of fear. Because of its vital influence, it was naturally associated with the concept of goodness and divinity. The sun was symbolized through many sacred figures across different civilizations: Brahma among the Hindus, Mithras among the Persians, and Atham, Ammonius, Ptah, and Osiris among the Egyptians. In other lands, it took the form of Bel among the Chaldeans, Adonai among the Phoenicians, and Adonis and Apollo among the Greeks, all expressions of the same solar force, the ever-renewing source of life. Throughout the ancient world, shrines and sacred structures were erected in honor of this celestial being. Many of these still stand in various forms today: the pyramids of Egypt and Yucatan, the serpent mounds of Native America, the tiered ziggurats of Mesopotamia, Ireland's round towers, and the great stone circles of Britain and France. Even the Tower of Babel, as portrayed in biblical tradition, might well have functioned as a center for watching the stars. A deep understanding of the sky was shared among numerous early religious leaders, whether of pagan or Christian background, and their teachings often become clearer when interpreted through the lens of astronomy and astrology. As human insight into the heavens expanded, religious belief systems began to incorporate this cosmic knowledge. Deities were associated with specific celestial spheres, and the visible stars were grouped into symbolic constellations. The sun, traveling among these groupings along with its planetary companions, became a central figure in both myth and ritual, a cosmic symbol of the eternal rhythm of life and rebirth. From thoughtful contemplation of the sun's nature and functions emerged the doctrine of a divine triad, which has left a deep imprint on many religious traditions. This concept of a triple divinity is not limited to Christianity or Judaism. It appears prominently in the sacred teachings of numerous ancient civilizations. Cultures such as the Persians, Hindus, Babylonians, and Egyptians all upheld versions of a trinity, each presenting three aspects of one unified divine mind. In modern Masonic tradition, this principle is represented by the equilateral triangle, three equal sides symbolizing three fundamental expressions of the eternal, whose essence is portrayed as a tiny flame, the Hebrew Yod, a sign of divine presence. Jacob Boehme, the German mystic, referred to this triad as the three witnesses, the means through which the invisible divine becomes perceptible within the material world. The origin of this idea can be traced to the daily course of the sun itself. As the source of all visible light, it moves through three clear stages: its rising, its zenith at midday, and its descent into night. Philosophers identified these stages with a pattern of life: birth, fullness, and decline. Morning, veiled in blue mist, became the image of God the Father, the Creator. Midday, when the sun shines in full brilliance, represented God the Son, the Revealer, radiant and golden, the Lion of Judah, the world's Redeemer. The setting sun, cloaked in red, symbolized God the Holy Spirit, departing into the unseen world, only to return again with the dawn. This pattern, seen daily, became a spiritual map for understanding divinity in threefold form. For the Egyptians, the sun's daily cycle was a symbol of eternal life. Though it disappeared each evening, it always rose again, making it a perfect emblem of rebirth and immortality. Beyond its daily journey, the sun also travels through a yearly path across the sky, moving through the 12 houses of the zodiac, spending a period in each one. There is also a slower, majestic movement through the heavens, called the precession of the equinoxes, in which the sun shifts gradually backward through the signs of the zodiac. Robert Hewitt Brown reflected on this yearly journey, noting how the sun, as it moves through the zodiac, was believed to take on the nature of each sign or triumph over it. In Taurus, the sun was seen as a bull and worshipped by the Egyptians as Apis and by the Assyrians as Bel or Bol. In Leo, it became a lion slayer, like Hercules. In Sagittarius, it was portrayed as an archer, and in Pisces as a fish, represented by deities such as Dagon or Vishnu. These symbolic forms reveal that ancient priests were not merely conducting rituals to lifeless idols, but venerating the solar principle itself, which they regarded as the most immediate expression of divine presence. Godfrey Higgins, after decades of study, concluded that the gods of antiquity all trace back to solar worship, either the sun itself as divine, or as a symbol of the greater creative force beyond it. The solar fire was seen as the visible face of the invisible source, a radiant emblem of the eternal and all-generating divine intelligence. The Egyptian priests often adorned themselves with lion skins during their sacred rites, as the lion was a symbol of the sun. This connection arises from the sun's exalted position in the zodiacal sign of Leo, a constellation once regarded as the cornerstone of the celestial structure and traditionally ruled by the solar orb. Similarly, the figure of Hercules represents the solar force. His legendary labors mirror the sun's journey through the 12 divisions of the zodiac, with each task symbolizing a vital contribution to nature and humanity. Hercules, like the Egyptian clergy, wore a lion's hide, reinforcing his solar identity. The biblical figure Samson, whose name is closely linked to the sun, also reflects this symbolism. His encounter with the lion, his conflict with the Philistines, interpreted as forces of darkness, and his feat of removing the gates of Gaza all correspond to phases of the sun's dynamic influence. Many ancient cultures revered more than one solar deity, and it was often believed that each divine being bore some aspect of the sun's brilliance. Gold, commonly used in priestly ornaments, subtly pointed to solar light, just as the crowns of monarchs did. In earlier eras, these crowns were designed with protruding points to represent sun rays. Over time, the design became more stylized. Points were turned inward and capped with a globe or a cross. Scepters held by ancient rulers and spiritual leaders frequently featured solar emblems at their tip, with radiating lines echoing the sun's form. Earthly kingdoms were envisioned as reflections of heavenly ones, and the celestial realm was best depicted through the solar order, where the sun reigned supreme, the planets served as trusted advisors, and all of nature followed its command. Across civilizations, a wide array of deities was linked to the sun. In Greek tradition, figures such as Apollo, Dionysus, Bacchus, Sabazius, Hercules, Jason, Ulysses, Zeus, Uranus, and Vulcan were imbued with solar traits, whether physical or symbolic. In Northern Europe, Balder was honored as a radiant solar figure, and Odin, with his singular eye, was also tied to the solar archetype. Egyptian mythology abounds with solar parallels in gods like Osiris, Ra, Hermes, Anubis, and Ammon. Isis, regarded as the mother of the sun, and even Typhon, the destructive force, were seen as aspects of solar power. The sun cult of Egypt eventually coalesced around Serapis, a deity of profound solar mystery. In the Americas, gods such as Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, while associated with air and movement, clearly shared solar qualities. In the tradition of Freemasonry, the sun appears in many symbolic forms. One such symbol is Solomon, his name composed of syllables from various languages, each referring to the sun or divine light. Hiram Abiff, or Chiram of Chaldean lore, is another figure representing solar energy, and his symbolic death is interpreted in that context. George Oliver, in his writings on Masonic symbolism, emphasizes this role of the sun in ritual and hierarchy. As the sun rises in the east, so too does the Master of the Lodge hold his place there, illuminating the work and spirit of the assembly. The Egyptians used the sun as a symbol of divine wisdom, and within sacred orders, initiates wore garments decorated with sunbursts to reflect their connection to solar authority. Even the golden rays on the vestments of Catholic priests speak of an enduring lineage, tracing back to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, whose light continues to inform the symbols of sacred power. For reasons they evidently deemed compelling, the authors who documented the life and deeds of Jesus chose to cast him in the image of a solar divinity. The man of history gave way to a figure shaped by celestial allegory, as nearly every key episode described in the Gospels finds its mirror in the patterns, transitions, or duties of the heavenly bodies. Among the many symbolic narratives Christianity inherited from earlier pagan traditions is the image of the radiant, fair-skinned sun god. His golden locks cascading over his shoulders, clothed entirely in white, and bearing the lamb, emblematic of the renewal brought by spring. This noble figure blends the traits of various earlier deities such as Apollo, Osiris, Orpheus, Mithras, and Bacchus, sharing qualities and motifs drawn from each. Thinkers from Egypt and Greece divided the sun's annual journey into 4 distinct stages, each represented by a different form of the solar being. At the time of the winter solstice, this celestial power was portrayed as a helpless infant, miraculously escaping the dark forces intent on extinguishing him amid the cold and barrenness of winter. In this early stage, the sun was dim, lacking its full splendor, represented by a solitary golden strand of hair. Because his birth was aligned with Capricorn, the child was often shown being nursed by a goat. As spring approached, the sun grew into a vibrant youth, his shining hair falling in curls and his light, in the words of Schiller, stretching across the limitless sky. With the arrival of summer, the sun reached full strength, depicted as a powerful, bearded man in the height of his vigor, an image of nature at its most fertile and forceful. Then came autumn, when the sun aged into a weary figure, stooped and silver-haired, fading slowly into the gloom of winter. The complete cycle of the sun's life was seen as a full year, with its path moving through the signs of the zodiac in a grand and majestic procession. As the days grew short, the sun was said to have entered the domain of Delilah, identified with Virgo, where it lost its brilliance and power, just as Samson was shorn of his strength. In Masonic symbolism, this waning period of the year is represented by 3 sinister figures who conspire to destroy the Lord of Light and Truth. The sun's arrival was greeted with jubilation, while its retreat brought mourning and despair. This luminous giver of life, called the true light that enlightens all, was honored as the reviver of all that had withered, the feeder of the masses, the calmer of storms, the one who died only to rise again and renew the world. This ideal, this spirit of compassion and renewal, was enshrined in the figure known throughout Christendom as Christ, the Anointed One, the Light Incarnate, the embodiment of divine mercy and the eternal promise of redemption. The ancient pagans marked the return of light during winter with a celebration of the solar man's birth, which they placed at the heart of winter. This moment was cause for joy, marked by festivities, offerings, and public gatherings. The dark season was ending, and the radiant figure of light was making his way back to the lands of the north. The waning solar deity, in a final act of defiance, had brought down the dwellings of darkness, symbolically sweeping away the old to make space for the newly born sun rising from beneath the earth, surrounded by the creatures of the underworld, rich with symbolic meaning. One scholar from Balliol College at Oxford, in a treatise exploring humanity's origin and spiritual journey, commented on this season of renewal. He noted that the Romans had their own celebration honoring the return of the daylight god, marked by festivities and circus games. Commentaries from classical antiquity described this return as the emergence of the new sun. Even in early Christian thought, some church fathers suggested that the deeper significance of this holy day was not solely the birth of Christ, but also the reappearance of the solar light, an idea reinforced by the celebration of the unconquered sun, observed in Roman calendars during the era of Constantine and Julian. The title unconquered, also used by the Persians for Mitra, ties directly into the story of a divine figure born in a cave, mirroring Christian tradition, which later placed Christ's birth in a humble stable. The same writer made connections between celestial patterns and religious observances. As the sun progresses through the sky and reaches a specific point in its path, absorbing the celestial virgin into its blaze, This convergence was commemorated in a rite still observed by the Catholic Church. Known today as the Feast of the Assumption, it reflects the ancient idea that the Virgin, having fulfilled her role, is drawn into the radiance of her divine child and is elevated to a place beside him in the heavens. Ancient calendars from Rome document this transition, referring to the symbolic disappearance of Virgo around the same time. Previously called the Feast of the Passage, this event was also connected to Astrea by the Greeks and Romans, another figure of purity associated with the heavens. The Virgin Mother, who gives birth to the solar child, a figure preserved with devotion in Christian tradition, recalls the ancient inscription dedicated to her Egyptian counterpart, Isis, "The fruit which I have brought forth is the sun." Though the early pagans associated the Virgin with the moon, they clearly understood her celestial position as a heavenly sign. Throughout many cultures, she was honored as the one who bore the sun, and while the moon itself could not claim that role, the constellation of Virgo indeed could, and in their symbolic sky, did bring forth the sun on the celebrated day of birth. Albertus Magnus even affirmed that this sign of the celestial Virgin rose on the horizon at the moment believed to be the time of Christ's birth. Among certain Arabian and Persian astronomers, the three aligned stars in Orion's belt were seen as the wise ones who came bearing homage to the newly risen solar child. The same Oxford author adds further detail. In the sign that stood at the zenith during the night, Cancer, was a group of stars known as the Stable and the Ass, once called the cradle of Jupiter. Meanwhile, in the northern sky, the stars forming the Bear were named Martha and Mary by Arab stargazers, and also symbolized the resting place of Lazarus. In this way, the hidden teachings of ancient faiths were woven into the symbols and stories of Christianity, though modern believers follow them largely in ignorance. When questioned, they offer shallow explanations, having long since lost the deeper understanding that each new religion quietly inherits the mysteries of the one that came before. The ancient mystics taught that the sun, much like the human being, consisted of three distinct aspects. These were often referred to as three radiant forces: the divine sun, the intellectual sun, and the physical sun, each corresponding to the threefold nature of the human constitution. The divine sun embodied the will and presence of the universal Father, the intellectual sun expressed the vital energy of the cosmic sun, and the physical sun served as the manifesting body of the universal spirit. This triune solar concept was reflected in humanity's own structure: spirit, mind, and body. The body, shaped and energized by the physical sun, found its higher guidance through the divine sun, while the soul, or reasoning faculty, was transformed by the intellectual light. Some believed that the arrangement of the heavenly bodies and the elliptical nature of their courses pointed to the subtle influence of these three solar principles. Priests and sages of the ancient world envisioned the cosmos as a vast human figure and likened the three centers of solar activity to the brain, the heart, and the generative organs of the human frame. This idea found symbolic expression in the story of Christ's Transfiguration, which features three sacred dwellings, with a central one representing the heart and the others representing the mind and the generative force. The philosophical idea of multiple suns may have been inspired by rare atmospheric events where more than one sun appeared in the sky, phenomena that have been recorded on several occasions across history. Recognizing the sun as the greatest force behind physical vitality, the Hermetic philosophers also taught that a higher sun existed, one that nourished the invisible aspects of creation. Paracelsus wrote that, just as people can feel the warmth of the sun even if they are blind to its light, so too does the eternal spiritual sun influence the soul, even if one has not yet awakened the inner senses to perceive it. This inner perception, called intuition, allows the individual to become aware of this divine presence. Among some Rosicrucian thinkers, the three aspects of the sun were named distinctly. The spiritual sun was known as Vulcan, the intellectual sun as both Christ and Lucifer, and the physical sun as Jehovah, associated with the creative demiurge of certain mystical traditions. In this symbolic system, Lucifer represented the mind in its detached, unilluminated form, the false light that sought knowledge without spiritual guidance. The redemption of this false light by the light of the soul, referred to as the second Logos or Christ, was seen as the alchemical process that transforms the profane intellect into the divine mind. This secret work of inner transmutation paralleled the metaphor of turning base metals into gold. Franz Hartmann, in The Secret Symbols of the Rosicrucians, defined the sun in alchemical terms as the emblem of divine wisdom, the central source of strength and consciousness. He described the sun as the wellspring of energy, with every living being containing within it a latent sun, capable of awakening. In the awakened heart, the divine light stirs into life and becomes a radiant force that illuminates the intellect. In a further note, Hartmann remarked that the visible sun is a reflection of an invisible celestial sun, the material image of a higher spiritual source, from which it derives its power. Many ancient religions shared the belief that the visible sun was not the true origin of power, but rather a mirror reflecting a deeper, hidden source. In some traditions, such as the Norse myths, the sun was portrayed as a shield carried by a solar deity, Frey being one such example. This visible orb was believed to reflect the brilliance of an invisible spiritual sun, regarded as the actual source of vitality, illumination, and truth. According to this worldview, the physical realm is passive and receptive, manifesting the results of higher causes. These causes belong to the spiritual world, the domain of origination. Between these two realms lies an intermediate one, the intellectual or soul sphere, acting as a bridge. In this framework, Christ, embodying the higher soul and intellect, assumes the role of intermediary, declaring, by his nature and function, that access to the divine source must pass through him. In a similar pattern, the spirit functions in the human being as the sun does in the solar system. The body and its faculties orbit this inner light, drawing sustenance from it. This inner solar principle is said to be threefold, and these aspects, radiant and exalted, make up what is called the divine essence in man. The lower self, made up of the physical body, emotions, and intellect, mirrors this divine light and makes its presence known in the visible world. Symbolically, these two aspects are expressed through two interlaced triangles, one upright for the material nature, one inverted for the spiritual. Together, they form the six-pointed star, known among different traditions as the Seal of Solomon, the Star of David, or the emblem of Zion. This unification reflects the dual nature of humanity, both earthly and celestial. Man's animal instincts tie him to the ground, his divine spark to the heavens, and his mediating nature unites them. Mystical orders such as the Rosicrucians and the Illuminati envision spiritual beings, like angels and archangels, as radiant centers of force, glowing like miniature suns and surrounded by currents of energy, sometimes called vril. These luminous currents gave rise to the traditional depiction of wings, not as feathers but as arcs or fans of light, which enable movement through subtle, non-material realms. True mystics rejected the literal portrayal of such beings in human shape. They argued that such forms would be unsuitable for existence in the refined substance of the higher planes. In the debate over the habitability of other planets, materialist objections often cite the impossibility of human-like organisms surviving alien conditions. However, this reasoning overlooks the principle that life adapts to its environment. Ancient philosophers proposed that all life flows from the sun, and anything exposed to its light absorbs and later expresses this life in organic forms. One view pictured the sun as a generative source, and the planets as developing embryos, linked to their parent star by subtle, energy-bearing cords that nourish them. Some esoteric traditions even taught that the sun itself was home to a race of radiant beings, whose bodies were formed of a fine spiritual substance resembling the sun's own brilliance. They were not harmed by the sun's heat, as their nature was perfectly attuned to its frequency. These entities glowed like tiny suns, typically not much larger than a plate, though the more powerful among them were of much greater scale. Their luminous form was of golden-white fire, and from their core extended four streaming currents of force, constantly in fluid, rhythmic motion. A subtle pulsation ran through their essence, sending rippling vibrations along these streams. The most magnificent among them was known as Michael, considered the supreme being of solar life. The others of his kind, residents of the solar sphere, are commonly referred to by mystics and Christian esotericists alike as archangels or spirits of light. Gold has long been regarded as the metal most closely aligned with the sun, often viewed as sunlight crystallized into solid form. In alchemical texts, references to gold may point either to the physical substance or to the solar force itself, the spiritual essence from which gold is believed to arise. Sulfur, with its volatile and fiery qualities, was also frequently linked to the sun. Since gold symbolized the spirit and base metals were seen as expressions of man's lower tendencies, some alchemists were likened to miners, digging through the dense layers of material existence in search of that inner treasure, those rare virtues hidden within the heaviness of ignorance and earthly life. This idea was also represented by the image of a diamond lying within black carbon, a symbol of brilliance obscured by darkness. Similarly, the Illuminati depicted a pearl resting in the shell of an oyster at the ocean floor, signifying latent spiritual strength. In this view, the seeker of wisdom becomes a diver, plunging into the sea of illusion in pursuit of enlightenment, symbolized by the pearl of great price. Alchemists taught that every object, whether alive or inert, contained within it a spark of gold, meaning that all things, even a grain of sand, held a spiritual essence. A saying from the Rosicrucians emphasized this idea: a seed is useless and impotent unless it is put in its appropriate matrix. Franz Hartmann expanded on this by explaining that the soul cannot grow or evolve without a fitting vessel, as the body provides the necessary ground for its development. The aim of alchemy was never to fabricate something from nothing. Instead, its purpose was to nourish and awaken the spiritual seed that already exists in all things. Alchemical practice did not create gold in the literal sense, but helped the hidden essence of gold to emerge and blossom. Everything carries within it a spark of the divine, a sacred seed, and transformation is not about adding something foreign, but about bringing forth what is already inherent. This inner awakening allows the divine within to shine out like a sun, radiating light to all it touches. Apuleius, recounting his mystical initiation, once described witnessing the sun shining brilliantly at the stroke of midnight. This image of the midnight sun became a central emblem within the symbolic framework of alchemy. It signified the inner spirit of the individual radiating through the shadowy veil of the human form. At the same time, it pointed to the invisible spiritual sun at the heart of the cosmos, a light which, to the awakened mystic, could be perceived just as clearly in the deepest night as in the brightest daylight, unaffected by the limitations of the material world. The unusual radiance that filled the Egyptian temples during nocturnal ceremonies was believed by some to be a reflection of this spiritual sun, channeled through the arcane abilities of the temple priests. In the allegorical Masonic tale Etidorpa, Aphrodite in reverse, the strange light witnessed far beneath the earth's surface may very well allude to this same hidden sun of the mystery traditions. Early notions about the clash between good and evil were often mirrored in the daily transition between light and darkness. In medieval times, rituals associated with darker forces were deliberately performed under the cover of night, and those devoted to such practices were labeled black magicians. In contrast, those aligned with benevolent forces were known as white magicians. Thus, the opposition of black and white came to symbolize the timeless struggle between shadow and illumination, a theme reflected in the legends and sacred stories of countless cultures. In Egypt, the demon Typhon was often portrayed as part crocodile and part hog, creatures viewed as base and coarse, reflecting a nature tied to the physical and the profane. Since ancient times, darkness has stirred fear in living beings, and those few who thrived under its cover were frequently linked with malevolent powers. Because of this, animals like bats, owls, toads, and cats became symbols of witchcraft. In some European regions, it was believed that practitioners of dark magic could take the form of wolves under the cloak of night and wander in search of destruction, thus giving rise to the lore of the werewolf. Serpents, due to their connection to the earth, also came to embody the forces of darkness. Yet, when shown with wings, they represented the transformation of the lower instincts into higher spiritual states, embodying the perfected beings who had overcome base desires. Among the Egyptians, the rays of the sun were often depicted ending in human hands, and this symbolism finds a striking parallel in Freemasonry, where the lion's paw, a gripping hand, raises all things from death into renewed life. The traditional belief in 3 primary and 4 secondary colors is a surface-level view. From ancient times, it has been understood that there are actually 7 primary colors, though the human eye can only naturally perceive 3 of them. For example, while green can be created by mixing blue and yellow, there also exists a true green that is not a mixture but a fundamental color on its own. This is demonstrated when light passes through a prism. Secondary colors like orange do not break down further into red and yellow but remain distinct. Helmholtz confirmed that the supposed secondary colors of the spectrum resist decomposition into primary hues. Colors have long been linked symbolically to consciousness, intelligence, and force, represented respectively by blue, yellow, and red. Their therapeutic qualities align with this symbolism. Blue is calming and electrical, yellow invigorates and refines, while red stimulates and generates heat. This connection extends to nature as well, where the color of minerals and plants corresponds with their effects on the human body. For instance, a yellow flower tends to produce remedies that affect the body much like yellow light or the musical note mi, while orange flowers influence similarly to orange light, corresponding to specific musical tones or chords. Ancient traditions associated blue with the spirit, yellow with the mind, and red with the body. Accordingly, heaven was seen as blue, earth as yellow, and the underworld or hell as red. The fiery imagery of hell symbolizes the energy or force of that realm rather than literal flames. In Greek mysteries, the red sphere represented a state where consciousness is dominated by base passions and desires. Indian iconography often shows gods connected with Vishnu having blue skin, highlighting their divine and transcendent nature. Esoteric teachings hold that blue is the sun's true color, with the sun's familiar orange-yellow appearance caused by its light passing through the layers of the illusory material world. In early Christian symbolism, colors were essential and carefully regulated for their spiritual meanings. Over time, careless use has eroded much of this rich tradition. Originally, white or silver stood for life, purity, innocence, joy, and light. Red symbolized Christ's suffering and death, divine love, blood, and struggle. Blue represented heaven, godliness, and contemplation. Yellow or gold signified glory, abundance, and goodness. Green indicated fertility, youth, and prosperity. Violet expressed humility, deep love, and sorrow. Black conveyed death, destruction, and humility. The colors of saints' robes and church ornaments even communicated whether they had been martyred and the nature of their holy deeds. Beyond the visible spectrum lies a vast range of color vibrations, some too low and others too high for human eyes to detect. It is staggering to realize how little humanity knows about these unseen realms of light and consciousness. Just as explorers once charted unknown lands, the future promises that with new tools and technology, humans will venture into these hidden dimensions of color, sound, and awareness.